And I experienced 6 years. I was with someone for 6 years, and he was emotionally, physically, sexually, financially, digitally, all the types of abuse that there are out there. He basically did it. And I've been free probably coming up 3.5, 4 years now. So I know, right? Really, really good. And he's actually in prison for what he did to me. And just like, I just think the whole range of what I experienced, I know when I was in that relationship, there wasn't really, I couldn't really find any much support out there. And I wasn't really talking to my friends, and I just felt very isolated. So when as part of my healing journey, what I did was I started my Instagram page, and I thought I'm going to start speaking out about what's happened and just start reaching out to people and just sharing my experience, because obviously that way you don't feel that you're alone then, because you can relate and you can say, oh, yes, I've been through something similar. It also can really help raise awareness, because half the time I was in the relationship, it wasn't really until towards the end. I didn't even know it was abusive. I just thought it was fiery and passionate and, all these kind of things that you say to yourself. So I thought I'm going to see what I can do. So I started the Instagram, and I thought, it's going really well. And I thought I'm going to try and do this more. I wanted to do more of it. So I trained and I got my certification as a life coach. And in the UK, I'm qualified as a freedom program facilitator, where I was running support groups for women and just helping to help them educate. Because obviously when you're in an abusive relationship, and really the first step, I'd say, to coming out of it is education and really understanding why they're doing what they're doing, that it's not you, that you're not going crazy, that you're not the one to blame, that there's nothing you can do to fix it, and all these things that you feel when you're in the relationship. When you first educate yourself, it just helps you kind of able to just take that first step and move forward. As you say, your steps to healing, really. It's kind of a little bit of a process to it.
Of course. And I love what you said about it was abusive, but at the time you were looking at it as fiery and passionate, and it's all encompassing when you think about it that way. But we know that there's a cycle of abuse, and that's how they design it. They want it to be very exciting. They want it to be, as romantic as possible. And then something happens and they just apologize. And we just sit there and we're like, oh, this is perfect. We're back in the calm. But that's one of those things. We also talked about it, I think, in the trauma bonding, where they talk about how addicted your brain can get to this crazy cycle and the different hormones that keep coming and going for you. But that's really interesting, because I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. I know we've got some survivors on the call. I've been seeing your comments. Congrats, Emma, on being out. And I have to go back and look. It's so hard for me to see the comments sometimes, guys. Screaming Cathedrals, 17 years in dark prison, and now you're out. That's awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, definitely.
17 years is a long time. I don't want to pick on you, Screaming Cathedrals, but I think that's really interesting too, because last month we talked about why women stay. Zoe, can you talk to us a little bit about why you think women stay?
You know what? It's hard. I mean, it's a really complicated matter, because you originally get with that person because you love them, but I do genuinely think the reason you stay with them is because you're trauma bonded, and then you add into the mix that you might have children, and that you might end up being financially dependent on them, and all these other things that just make it much, much more difficult for you to leave. But obviously the thing is with the trauma bond is what that's actually doing is you think that is love, but really it's not, it's addiction. And they manufacture this by doing what's called intermittent reinforcement. So this is the thing that you mentioned earlier with the whole highs and the lows, where to start with, you really love them, they're really intense, they're really passionate, they seem really interested. At the beginning, they ask you so many questions, they seem to really want to get to know you, and you just think, oh my goodness, this person is so interested, they love me so much. And they might buy you gifts and they'll stay overnight, and you just think, oh, this is the perfect person for me. But then the next minute they go cold, and they might ghost you, or they might take like a couple days to respond to text message. Just this type of thing that is out of character to what normally happens. And what happens is, within this period you get really anxious, and then you start thinking, oh my God, what is it? What have I done? What's wrong with him? Is the relationship over? And but then they come back, and you're just so happy to see them and to hear from them. You kind of ignore the fact that they've ghosted on you and they've treated you in this manner that's really quite despicable and really disrespectful. And this happens all the time, you see. So they'll then come and they'll give you affection, and you're just happy and you forgive them for everything. And then you'll do something that displeases them, and then they'll go cold on you. And then they'll come back and they might throw in some accusations of cheating or whatever it is. And then you're then into the realm of you're having to defend yourself, but you're also so happy to see them that you kind of ignore the fact that they've behaved in this manner. And what this does is it has a chemical reaction within your body where it basically affects your central nervous system, and it creates an addiction, because every time you're happy to see them, endorphins and all these happy hormones get released in your brain, and it causes addiction. So you're, in the end, you get like this high just from being with them, and then you just end up constantly looking for the high. And you then are also then looking for the person that they were in the beginning. And by the time you then put into the mix that they've victim blamed you, they've projected, they've made you feel responsible for everything that they do, you kind of end up reaching this point where you just think, oh man, this is my fault. What have I done? It must be me, because he was fine when I first met him. So, you then start doubting yourself. And then by the time they put in all the gaslighting and the crazy making, and it's really hard. And ultimately what this does is, this whole thing that they do just makes us consumed with them, and all we think about is them. All we focus on is them, their wants, their needs, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, how they're going to react, how they're not going to react. You might do something one day and it makes them happy, and then you do something the day after and it makes them annoyed, and you just end up constantly living on this edge. And because your whole brain capacity is consumed and taken up with this way of thinking, you don't have time to then think, what's wrong with this relationship? Is it abusive? I need to leave. Because you think, I love this person, he wasn't like this in the beginning, and you just get stuck. And it's really hard, especially when there's not much out there with regards to educating and what is an abusive relationship. Because like mine was, well, how can it be abusive? He never actually punched me, he never gave me back. I mean, I didn't have any of that until after I'd left him, when he then did physically attack me and I had to have 12 stitches in my forehead. But it's like during the relationship, you just kind of make excuses and you justify, and you just think, oh, what can I do to fix this? And I think naturally most people that especially clients, people that I've spoken with, they're generally very kind, very forgiving, very empathetic, really, really good qualities. But it's these qualities that an abusive person or narcissist will target, because they make us people pleasing, and they make us look for, to just be making someone happy at the expense of our own happiness.
Absolutely. If you are on here today and you can think back to that feeling that he wasn't like this before and things were perfect before, you heard that excuse that we can go back to what we were before, give us a heart, give us a high five, give us something in the comments, because I think we hear this all the time. I know I dealt with that. Zoe, you did too. but that's all
Mm-hmm.
a part of that journey. It's a part of, they have a different intention with the relationship than you do from the start, and that's all by design by them, for sure.
Definitely.
When we were talking before, one thing we talked about was the concept of external validation and how you have to abolish it to get through the healing process. Can you tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on external validation?
Yeah. So I think most of us that have probably ended up in an abusive relationship, when you come out of it and you really start to look at the deep healing work that you have to do, you kind of look at yourself and you think, has there been a pattern to my relationships? So maybe you've been in more than one abusive relationship. Does it relate back to maybe incidents in your childhood? And you'd have to take some responsibility, as it were, in looking at what it is that you're doing that is maybe putting yourself or in these type of situations. So it really comes down to us wanting validation. So all of us, we all like to receive compliments, we all like to receive praise, and we all kind of look maybe for someone to go, oh, that's great what you did. And you might even think, oh, if I make this person happy, then that fulfills me and that makes me happy. But ultimately, you need to be making sure that you're happy before you can fulfill anyone else's needs. And when you think about validation, so validation is when we look for it externally, when we want other people to make us happy by what they do and what they say, it's it can be quite negative, because really what it's doing is it's taking the control from us and it's putting the control in the other person's hand. And when we go out there with this type of energy, basically, it's kind of needy in a way, and it's negative, because it's kind of saying, well, I need you to fulfill me. I need you to tell me that I look great. I need you to say that I'm a good mother. I need you to make me happy. When all of that should be coming from ourselves. And once you get to that point of being able to self-validate, then you don't need anyone else. So for instance, I'll give you an example. I mean, you're a woman, I'm a woman, so we all do it. You buy a dress, you buy an outfit, it's for an event, and you try it on and you think, you know what, this looks business, it's great. You go home, you put it on, and then you go to the event and someone makes a comment and they're like, oh, you know what? I'm not sure about that. Makes you look a bit fat, or it's a bit low cut, and it's just a bit negative. And then it can really impact your mood, right? And then it takes all your joy away from having worn that dress. And that really is an example of someone having externally validated you and the negative impact it can have. Whereas if you're confident in your dress and in how you look, there is nothing anyone can say to you that's going to make you feel rubbish about yourself, because you know you look good. And it's this difference between knowing and feeling. So when you think about it, it's like we hear a lot about self-esteem and self-confidence, and it's like they're two quite different things. So it's like your self-confidence is probably what you portray, but your self-esteem is what's inside you and it's what you know. And you build that by by validating yourself. So by doing things that build your confidence, by pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and achieving things, by just knowing that no matter what anyone says, you look and feel good. And once you get to that place, you're not putting the power in anyone else's hands. So you see, when we go into a relationship, and if we're needing them to validate us, then what happens is you get into this whole cycle that we was talking about, where they might or they might not. And it's much more easier for someone to manipulate the whole intermittent reinforcement type thing that we was talking about earlier.
Absolutely. And that could be different for different facets of your life too. And I think that's one thing
Yes,
we always
totally.
forget is you can be you can have great self-esteem in one area and not other areas. And if we're not self-aware, if we're not taking the time to look at that, we might not recognize it. And of course, when they're starting to come off with the compliments and the suggestions and, I think this is great, but this is my opinion on it, it always seems like it's coming from a good place. In the beginning, it's, wow, they really care. That was probably hard for them to say. But in reality, it's going to twist. And when it starts to twist, that's what we have to be aware of. And that's why I think what you do in really focusing on the education is so important. Because if we don't know what to look for, we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think generally, if it kind of comes down to also as well having, I mean, we hear the word boundaries all the time, and it's like boundaries are really there to protect your mental and emotional state. And they also, but obviously boundaries don't just come around by themselves. You have to really think about what boundary you need and why you would want it. So again, you have to go into this whole self-reflection, and you have to think about, well, what are my needs? What are my wants? What will I tolerate? What will I not tolerate? And once you kind of clearly think about all this stuff before you go into, say, your next relationship, if you're looking to move forward, you've already done all the work on yourself, and you're in a much stronger position to ensure that you don't end up in another abusive relationship. Because, the stats show us that 1 in 4 people, women, and one in 6 men end up in abusive relationships. I think it's narcissists. It's like every 2 in 8 that you meet will be a narcissist or sociopath. So it's like the odds of meeting one again is pretty high, and you have to do what you need. So educating yourself and doing all the inner work on yourself to be able to protect yourself from getting into one of these type of relationships again, because they're just out there hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a little bit of a discussion about boundaries with Yaya from Make Time to Cuddle. If you didn't see that video, go on our IGTV, check it out. She's talking all about dating after abuse, and she has some beautiful tips on setting boundaries, because a lot of us, unfortunately, might not have had boundaries before. We might not have thought of them as boundaries, and maybe that's why narcissists, they look for your boundaries to start to break them down. And once you start to give in on boundaries, it gives them a little bit of a high, right? It's something that they've been looking for, and they've kind of won. And everything is this little battle. One thing you said made me think too. You're talking about that, some of the positive self-talk, and how can you reinforce, how do you feel what you're feeling and not the influence of someone else? And we know, we've been there, both of us have been there. It's not always easy, depending on where you are in that journey, and honestly, depending day to day, minute to minute. You might not feel that positivity. There's always something positive in your story because you've already left. And sometimes you have to just remember that I took the step and I left. And you know what? Sometimes things get worse. And so in your case, things got worse. You pull away the victim, and now their control is all out of whack. Their whole being is tied to you, not in the positive way, not in the way that you're thinking, the love and the sweetness, and we're meant for each other, we need each other. No, they're tied to you because they have nothing without that victim, without that control. Everything about their self-worth is based on how they can manipulate and control another human being. But being able to look at it and say, you know what, that was a hard step, that was a critical step. Even when you're not feeling that positivity, even when you don't feel like you're building the confidence, you're building the self-esteem up, and it starts to break you back down, you just have to remember that you did take the hard step and you did leave, and that is strong as hell.
Yeah, totally. I mean, leaving is really hard because, it's basically you're fighting them, but you also fight in a battle because you're trauma bonded. You also might still love them.
Yes.
You have kids with them. You have all your whole belief system where you might feel that, children need 2 parents, and no matter what, that's what's best, or children always need a daddy, or you might think, oh, no matter what, I don't want to be divorced, because there might be all the stigma depending on your culture or your religion around divorce. So, you know, there are things that you have to fight against when you're looking to leave. So to be able to take the step to leave, yeah, it's hard. And you have to give yourself credit for that. And you have to say, you know what, be proud of what you've done, because ultimately that it's hard. And there are many people that just don't for whatever reason, you know, and yeah, it's a hard choice to make for sure.
For sure. And you know, Zoe, one thing that we talked about that I was just so amazed with was your action item for worry journals. Can you tell us
Oh
about
yeah.
the worry journal and the questions you can ask yourself to actually rewire your brain?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something I normally do with my clients. But if you are having, so for instance, I mean, I suffered after I left my relationship. I was diagnosed with PTSD, battered woman syndrome, which is kind of like a cognitive dissociation type thing. I also had um, panic attacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, you know, the whole thing that you get from just having been in an abusive relationship. And it's hard. So one of the things I did was with the help from my therapist is it's called a worry journal. And what you do is whenever you feel anxious or you have a anxiety attack or a panic attack, what you do is you write out this journal and you have these headings, right? So you're going to get a piece of paper and you're going to do some headings. So the first heading is the day, the next heading is stressful situation, the next one is feelings. So you're going to write in there what's happened to cause your stress, and you're going to write your feelings. So was you scared? Was you anxious? Was you panicked? Was you frightened? Whatever it is, you just write it and then you rate it. You give it a rating of 1 to 10. And then in the next column, you're going to write your negative thoughts. So the fact you might think, oh, this is all my fault. I'm so rubbish. Why does this stuff always happen? And whatever it is that you're feeling that's negative, and you're going to write that down. Because obviously this is the type of stuff that we're feeling, and this is the type of stuff that we need to work through. So, but then what you do is you have to challenge those thoughts, because you have to be able to switch your mindset from negative to positive. And obviously these thoughts that we have in us, especially if you've been in an abusive relationship for a number of years or months, or depending on your childhood or whatever, we all have negative and limiting beliefs, right? So what you then do is you would write in the next column and you ask yourself these questions. So for instance, what is the evidence that what I'm feeling is true? Is there any evidence? So you might say, oh, I'm such a failure at this, I always get everything wrong. Well, what's the evidence that you're a failure? I'm sure there's plenty of things that you've done in your life where you're not a failure. So you write down the answer. And then you might say, I always. So this is black and white thinking, right? This is all or never. So you ask yourself, am I using all or nothing wording, basically? And if you are, well, nothing is ever, always, forever, can't, never, you know what I mean? All these type of things. It's so you have to challenge this thought process. And you might say to yourself, what would you say to a friend who is going through this situation? So you see, we're often way, way harder on ourselves.
Yeah.
And we don't show ourselves compassion, and we don't show ourselves kindness, and we don't show ourselves love. But if it was a friend going through the same thing, we'd probably be full of really good advice and kind words and compassion. And you really have to look at yourself as if you are that friend, because really you deserve it. And no one is all that bad, all that rubbish, all that disastrous, all that failing, because everyone has positive qualities. And it's just a case of changing your mindset. So each time you have a negative thought, just you just journal it and write it down, and you just challenge. And then what you do is at the end of that process, you think about the first situation that caused you to have those negative feelings. You write down what those feelings were. So if it was fear, anger, and panic, and then you re-rate yourself. And normally what happens is your rating would be much lower than what it was, how you rated it in the beginning. And obviously each time you do this process, what you're doing is your ratings will get lower and lower because you're rewiring your brain basically. And when you do this type of thing with a therapist or counselor or coach, someone like me, you would cover this type of thing in a session, which keeps you accountable, because I know what it's like when you have to write stuff. You kind of think, I can't be bothered, I'm too busy. Is it really important? But when you know that you're going to be speaking to someone about it in like a few days' time in your session, you think, okay, I will do this. I will write this out, and then you properly invest the time, because ultimately this is for your own healing, and healing's hard work. You know, it's kind of like leaving is definitely the first step, but healing is you healing layers. So it's like you might remove yourself from the initial situation and the initial trauma, and you can kind of heal the worst, you know, the top layer of it. But to get down to the deep stuff, the stuff that is causing the nightmares, the anxiety, the panic attacks, the low self-esteem, this is by doing this type of journaling, this is how you can kind of get to healing that sort of stuff, really.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's something so powerful about getting it out of your head and onto paper,
Oh,
where you can
totally.
read it back to yourself and go, hold on, this isn't right. And
Yeah.
I think there's so much power in that. We talk about, when you first leave, as soon as you can, write down all the reasons you left. Because they're
Yes.
going to challenge every single reason why you left. And there are going to be times when you don't feel like it. There are going to be times that it gets difficult. And you have to build that strength within yourself to go, okay, these are the things that I'm feeling, but this is my reasoning. And when you can go back to that, I think there's something powerful. And the same thing when you're looking at your situations, you're getting it out of you, off of your chest, and you can go back and
Hmm.
look at it and see how you rate differently. I think that's so powerful. I love that idea.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's all part of like the whole CBT therapy thing. So it's comes under cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just really looking at how your brain works and rewiring pathways. So, I mean, if you think about it, when you're in an abusive relationship, you form habits, and these habits are often unhealthy and they're detrimental to yourself. And that's purely because of the type of environment and the person that you've been with, that they've had the time to slowly chip away, chip away, chip away, erode your boundaries, erode your person. And I kind of always think that ultimately when you're in an abusive relationship, it's a bit like identity theft, you know? It's like they do still, and they gradually erase away the person that you were. It's like they take you and you just become something different. You become a shadow of yourself. You kind of stop doing the things that you love, and you kind of have all these feelings of hate and everything. I mean, I remember just thinking I couldn't even look in the mirror because I hated how I looked so much. And and you just have to look at these things, and you gradually take an area at a time, and you just start working on it. But obviously it can be hard, and just working on these things in themselves can cause like panic attacks and stuff like that. Anyway, especially if you're doing it where you don't have a good support network. Having someone, whether it's your mom, your sister, your best friend, someone like me, just someone who can support you and understand you and validate your experience, is so important.
Absolutely. Oh, we got a
Mm.
lot of hearts for that. Love it. It makes me think too. It's so easy. We get these lists in our head, right? I need
Hmm.
to find a better job. I need to be able to get my own bank account. I need to move forward with this. I need to, you know, still take care of this and that for the kids. And you just start listing all these things that you have to do now that you've left. And these things are not easy things, but they're the easier things than thinking about, well, how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to emotionally heal? How am I going to get myself to a place where I can take better, more positive steps to refine who I am? What do I like to do? What makes me happy? You know, I think that's one of those hard questions. We always talk about, you know, you need to find what makes you happy. That's a hard question. You don't have to feel stupid for that being a hard question. Everything in your life, like you said, there's kind of that identity theft. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you're doing, where you're going. It's all been reliant on them, and that's how they've designed it. So I think that that's really important too. Is just making sure these things that are they're a little less tactical, you know, tactile at least. You have to focus on them too. They have to be a part of this plan and this journey for yourself. Because if you don't take care for rewiring your brain, things will constantly feel like they're dragging you down, always.
Exactly. And I kind of looked at it and I thought, you know what? My ex, he's in prison for what he did to me. And yet, if I kind of didn't heal myself properly and I allowed myself to not go places where there were crowds and all these things that just caused me to have anxiety, I thought to myself, you know what, ultimately I'm still letting him control me, and I'm a prisoner in my own life, and I'm being made a prisoner by him. And I just thought, I can't have that. You know, you just have to, it's hard. I mean, the stuff we're talking about, it sounds easy, right? You know, and you just think, yeah, but it's not. This stuff's really difficult, and it takes time, and you kind of have to focus on a little bit at a time, and just, you know, not feel overwhelmed by it. And then when you do have bad days, just go, you know what, it's fine, it's a bad day, accept it, feel it, and then move on from it, because that's also part of healing. You know, healing is processing, which is feeling. And you know, generally, you don't want to have to feel any of this stuff, because it's, most of the time, it's unpleasant, right?
Yeah. Give yourself as much grace as you've given them.
Totally.
Start there.
Yeah.
Zoe, thank you so much. I want to make sure before you leave, you've given us so many survivor strategies. I'm not even going to make you rename them all. But why don't you give us your remind her for our group?
So the only thing I would say, right, is ultimately you need to make yourself the number one priority in your life, because when you're in an abusive relationship, you spend all your time discounting yourself. You put them first, then your kids are next, then it's the housework, and no matter how tired you are, you still keep going, and you just think it doesn't matter, I'll just get on with it. But really, that's discounting yourself, and that's you saying to yourself that you're not important and that you don't matter, when the reality is you are important and you do matter, because without you, there would be no home, there would be no kids, there would be no happy life that you're trying to build. So definitely put yourself as number one, and everything that you do, it's not selfish to cut people off or to prioritize or to say no, and to put these type of boundaries in. You know, you don't always have to say yes to everything, and just go, I'm number one. What am I going to do today that's going to make me happy? Not something that's practical, not something that's for the kids, not something that's for them, but something that's for you, that you like doing. Because when you're happy, ultimately everyone else will then become happy around you.
Absolutely. And if they don't, they're probably not the right people.
Exactly.
To be around.
Yeah.
I love it. Zoe, go ahead and tell them where they can find you on Instagram.
Yeah, so you can find me as I'm Self-Love After Abuse. So yeah, come and give me a follow, because I share all kinds of tips and advice about sort of everything to do with healing, self-loving yourself, the steps of self-love. They even things to do with if you're having to represent yourself at court, so little bits of legal tips and just everything. And obviously I've got my website, which is www.selfloveafterabuse. And so yeah, so just come and drop me a follow, or if anything we've spoken about, if you want to ask me about it, you know, with the worry journal or anything, just send me a message because I can send all this stuff over to you. Because I know trying to remember the format of how you need to maybe do your table or the type of questions you might want to ask yourself is probably difficult, frantically trying to listen and write this stuff down. So yeah, send me an email and I can ping this stuff over, no problem.
Awesome. Make sure you guys do it. That's how
Yeah,
I found Zoe. If you guys ever want to know how I find all of our webcast hosts, it is because I've used them, I've followed them, and I've loved their content too, and they've helped me. Zoe, thank you, thank you, thank you
oh, you're
for
welcome.
taking the
Thanks for
time.
having me.
It's amazing to see our community grow, especially when we're looking at, you know, where are you located again?
Oh, UK, London.
Yeah, London, and I'm in Florida. So it's crazy to
I know,
see.
mad, right?
We hate that so many women have experienced this,
Mm,
but how amazing to be able to come into this community after so much isolation and say, you know what, somebody understands me. And so many people
definitely.
understand me. We are definitely stronger together. I fully believe that. If
Hmm.
you are watching this post webinar and you're at this point, make sure that you've watched all of Zoe's videos. We will break them up for our IGTV at Remind Her and VMT. Give me a follow. Give Zoe a follow at Self Love After Abuse. And make sure you follow up on that worry journal. If you use your worry journal and it's working, tell us, tell us, tell us. We'd love to
Yes,
hear your
definitely.
results. Awesome. Well, thank you, Zoe. You have a good rest of your day.
Yes, thank you. Take care. Bye.